Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head down to Brazil once again and we're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel once before. Now, as I've told you previously, I'm a huge fan of the Brazilian craft beers. We've had some really awesome ones here on the channel over the last little while, and whenever I get the chance to try some new ones, I will always jump at it. But like I say, we're returning to a brewery that's featured on the channel once before. The last beer that I had from these guys was pretty awesome. We're going to stick to the same style today, but try a slightly different sub-style. And the sub-style is one that I very much enjoy. It's also a sub-style that I know Brazil is particularly good at as well. So needless to say, I'm very, very curious to see what this one is going to have in store for us. So hopefully it's another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head to Sao Paulo and we're going to have a look at another beer from Cervejaria Augustinus. So this particular beer is called Coffee Monster. It comes in at 11% ABV, and this one is a Russian Imperial Stout with coffee beans added into the brew. So as I've told you on many an occasion before, one of my favourite adjuncts that you can put into an Imperial Stout is of course coffee beans. I don't actually drink coffee normally, but yeah, coffee beans are like hops and they can give you a lot of different properties. So yeah, always interesting to see how these beers go, and we've had some excellent coffee stouts from Brazil in the past. But like I say, Brazil has a very strong beer scene these days. If you're watching from here in Europe and you want to try some Brazilian beers, I'd recommend that you check out beerdome.nl. They are the ones who supply me with most of these Brazilian beers that I'm reviewing for you here on the channel, and yeah, this one was no exception to that. But yeah, go and check out their website. They've got a great Brazilian selection amongst other things, but that's where I get all these Brazilian cans from. So yeah, let's crack on with this one then and see how we get on. The Coffee Monster 11% Russian Imperial Stout with coffee from Cervejaria Augustinus in Sao Paulo. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Cervejaria Augustinus in the past, and we will no doubt add more to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. It's always great to have your support and it's hugely appreciated. If you want to see more reviews as well, of course, you can also check out the channel homepage. You can search in there for beers from different countries, cities, whatever. The whole channel has a geography-based tagging system, and you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the Brazilian playlist, along with many others, and I'm sure we'll add to that in the near future. But let's go on and have a little look at my brewery notes then for Cervejaria Augustinus. So, Cervejaria Augustinus, as I mentioned to you already, are based in Sao Paulo, and the company was founded by Gabriel Cunha and Leonardo Indini. So, Leonardo apparently first got the idea to start brewing beer along with two of his friends, Flavio Deschen and Diogo Pantaleão. I do apologise if any of these pronunciations are not correct, but these three often used to just sit and drink beer together. They loved trying different things. They were big fans of the Belgians, the double IPAs, and also the high alcohol beers, and so they decided to take a basic brewing course and then brew some clones of their own favourite beers. But they started brewing back in 2013. However, over time, Diogo stopped participating in the brewing, and then eventually so did Flavio. So Leonardo called Gabriel at this point to join him, and this was where Cervejaria Augustinus began to kind of take off. But over the coming years, they continued to develop their recipes, and their beers gradually gained fans. They were helped out by a few other breweries such as Trilha and Cinco Elementos, with whom they did collaborations, and these guys currently operate as a gypsy brewery and brew their beers in a number of different places, including Trilha and Cinco Elementos, as we mentioned, but also at Dadiva. The first commercial beers that they released appeared in 2018, and they chose the name Augustinus from St. Augustine, who is the patron saint of brewers. So the artwork on these beers is designed by the aforementioned Flavio Dechen, of course, who was one of the homebrewing experimenters with Leonardo back in the days. And as of October 2022, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced in the region of 30 different kinds of beers. Two notable ones are the Death in the Abyss that they did with Cinco Elementos, which is a 20% Imperial Stout, and also the Dead by Dawn, which is a 24% Imperial Stout, and those two sound like ones that I would very much like to get my hands on. But yeah, this is the second Imperial Stout that we'll be trying from Augustinus. I guess we need to try something that's a slightly different style next time. But this beer was a recommendation from one of my colleagues, Alan at the Bishop's Arms. He told me this one was really good and that I should get a can of this. And of course, I love Imperial coffee stouts, so it wasn't too hard to convince me, I have to say. So yeah, as I say, 2 Imperial Stouts that we've tried now from Cervejaria Augustinus. This should be quite nice. But yeah, if you want to learn, that's everything I can tell you about Cervejaria Augustinus. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on. And you can, of course, check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn more about the different beers that they've done. Or you can check out my other review that I did maybe about a year and a bit ago. But yeah, let's crack on then and have a wee look at this beer itself. So like I mentioned earlier, this one is an 11% Imperial Russian Imperial Stout with coffee added into the brew. It's brewed using Coffee, who are a local Sao Paulo roastery, and the beer itself is brewed at Dadiva. You know, we mentioned that Cervejaria Augustinus are a gypsy brewery, but based primarily in Sao Paulo. So just to let you have a little look at the artwork on this one, it does look very, very nice, as you can see. There you can see the Cervejaria Augustinus label at the top. It's a 375 milliliter can, but yeah, it looks very, very good, I have to say, this one. Yeah, I can't remember what I paid for this beer. Sorry, I told you lies. It's 350 milliliters actually. So yeah, in Brazil, I'm not sure how they measure things, if they do it in just 50 milliliters or if they use a mix of the American system or whatever. But yeah, this one is a 350 milliliter can. But yeah, let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. I'm really curious to see what this is going to have in store for us. So yeah, as I've told you in previous reviews as well, coffee beans, one of my favourite adjuncts that you can put in Imperial Stouts. They've always just got some really interesting characteristics, of course. Coffee beans grow in different parts of the world. They're like hops, you've got different soil profiles, different water profiles and things, and these can all go some way towards affecting the flavour of a coffee bean. The mazzle as well is very important. The meters above sea level at which you grow the coffee, the higher altitude at which you grow the coffee, the more likely you are to get different aromatic and fruity flavours and stuff like this. That's the great thing about coffee beans. They are pretty much as diverse as hops can be. But anyway, let's have a little look at this beer. So before the head disappears, I think we can safely say that this beer poured with about a half finger of a frothy, I would say kind of medium beige head on this one. 1 or 2 big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass at the bottom there, but a few going up towards the bottom of the head. You can see the head is just fading away to be a nice kind of thin foamy layer. But yeah, it looks absolutely great, this one. In terms of the colour of the beer, it's pretty much as you would expect from any Imperial Stout, a lovely dark ebony rosewood colour. If we shine the light through it, it does have a little bit of a kind of chestnutty, ebony sort of colour. But yeah, it does look very, very nice in that sense. Yeah, it looks pretty awesome, I have to say, but this beer is pretty much black as night. So remember, the colour of your beer depends on 1, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. 2, the length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. Any barrel aging that you do or any adjuncts that you put in will affect the colour of the beer as well. But when it comes to Imperial Stouts, it's actually quite hard to get barrel aging and adjuncts to affect the colour of the beer. Normally these beers are black enough because of the black malt or the special beer, whatever has been used in the base of these beers. Quite often as well, they can be double mash, or they can have very, very long wort boils. Those are 2 of the characteristics of the modern craft beer Imperial Stout. So going by the darkness of this one's either had a very long wort boil or it is double mash. And the Brazilian Imperial Stouts, in my experience, tend to be very, very thick. So yeah, this one I think could be very, Very interesting actually, because it does look pretty damn good. Other than that, I don't think we really need to say anything about the appearance of this beer, so it's probably just as well that we crack into the aroma. There's nothing particularly surprising about this one. So let's have a wee look at that and just see how we go. So let's have a wee look at our coffee monster then. Oh yeah. There's just something about this sub-style of beer that's there is, as I say, just something about this sub-style of beer that is incredible. I love the smell of these big Imperial coffee stouts. And the Brazilian ones as well, like I say, are just awesome. This beer, just as a kind of flyover of it, if you like, this beer gives you everything that you want from the style. You've got the kind of nice you've got the coffee bean just adding depth to it. You've got a bit of sweetness in there. You've got a bit of roastiness from the kind of Russian Imperial stout side of things. Some nice red fruit. You've got a little bit of hoppiness as well. Yeah, this beer, it's very, very well rounded in terms of its aroma. So yeah, let's have a wee look at that aroma a little bit more in depth and just describe it for you properly. Yeah, it's beautiful. So, backbone of the beer is just incredible. I mean, you have the backbone of this beer. You've got a lovely sort of almost woody, slightly dry woody backbone to the beer. On top of that, there's some nice roasty toasty bread crust, which I do really quite like. So yeah, nice kind of almost, as I say, slightly dry woody backbone, some roasty toasty well fired bread crust. On top of that, there is some nice as I say, there is some really nice kind of sweet brown bready characters in there. So yeah, wood, well fired bread crust, some sweet almost kind of brown rye bready notes for sure. It is quite dense in terms of its breadiness, but then on top of that you get a little bit of a lighter kind of wholemeal brown bready character as well, which I certainly appreciate that. I really enjoy a nice kind of sweet brown bready character. But yeah, aroma wise, this beer is pretty damn awesome. I have to say that for sure. Yeah, so on top of the brown bread, there are elements of chocolate in there. So there's a little mix. There is a teeny little bit of a milky chocolate to this one, but I would say the chocolatey side of the beer, it has a wee bit of dryness, and it's sort of sitting around that kind of 60-70% cocoa chocolate. It's not the darkest of dark chocolates that I've come across, but it's not the lightest either. So I think about 60-70% cocoa chocolate in this one is reasonable. Now, in terms of the kind of brown sugars in this beer actually does smell quite leathery, so that tells me that this beer has maybe had a slightly longer wort boil. Whenever you boil the wort a bit more, you start to get these kind of leathery brown sugary notes, and this beer has an element of kind of tobacco to it as well. You know, as I say, when I was doing my chemistry degree, we used to, dissolve tobacco and find out all its components and things like that, and it was quite a common experiment. And the smell of tobacco, though, I've never smoked in my life, but the smell of tobacco I actually quite like, I have to say. But this beer really does have some of that tobacco-y note to it. You've got the cocoa nibs in there, but you've got a good little bit of leathery brown sugar. There's also a big bit of a kind of sweet treacle molasses sort of thing going on in this beer. So lovely big kind of sweet treacle molasses in there. A little bit of a toasty brown sugar, but also a kind of straight up caramel at the same time. So yeah, aroma wise, this beer I think is pretty damn awesome. Yeah, I mean, on the brown sugar notes you get with this, it's got this lovely leatheriness, bit of treacle molasses, bit of sweeter caramel, and maybe just a teeny little hint of biscuit. But the sweet side of this beer I think is awesome. Further that you go out into the nose of this, you get a little bit of vanilla, of course. You've got a little bit of the kind of leathery side of the beer too, and it's also got this kind of chocolate muffiny, cacao, chocolate cake type thing to it. There's certainly a bit of that in there. What we haven't mentioned so far though is the coffee beans, and I wanted to take that kind of separately because coffee beans, of course, have their own really distinct characteristics. and for the most part I tend to find Brazilian coffee is quite aromatic. This one is a wee bit different though. So with the coffee that you get in here, it is quite aromatic. Underneath that you do have a fairly smooth roast to it and a little bit of earthiness, but there's also there is also a good little bit of red fruity character to it as well. So yeah, there's a smooth earthiness, nice little bit of aromaticity, but I'm also getting some kind of plummy and raisiny characters coming out of this, out of the coffee bean in this one too. But as I say, the coffee bean almost smells like it's embedded in the bready and cakey, muffiny type parts of the beer. So that's really interesting too. But I think that covers what we need to say about the malty, yeasty side of this beer. I think we've covered everything from that perspective. Of course, the Imperial Stout is a very malty, heavy, adjuncty type beer, actually. But on the hoppy side of things with this, you do get a little remnant of hop. I'm not actually sure how old this can is, but to be honest, when it's an Imperial Stout at 11%, you don't need to care that much. But yeah, with this beer, from the hoppy side of things, there's a little bit of earthiness for sure. Yeah, a little bit of earthiness for sure. There's also a little bit of a herbally note as well. But you know, the thing is with the Imperial Stout, the longer you leave these beers, the hops will drop out. But there's also a little bit of a kind of floral thing as well. And then there's a nice little bit of a grassy, zesty element to it as well. But yeah, nice little bit of oily, grassy, zesty sort of thing to it. There's a little bit of floral aromaticity in there. And yeah, I think it works. But the green component for me is quite oily. There's just a little bit of earthiness. But remember, an Imperial Stout is not the most hop forward kind of beer. When it comes to the fruity side of things from the hops though, at the front of the nose, yeah, this beer, it absolutely has a nice bit of raisiny sharpness to it. There's a lot of oily plum in there, some prune. Nah, maybe not prune. This beer's actually more oily and bright than that. There's raisin sharpness, there's plum, definitely a bit of fig, and you've also just got that wee bit of a kind of raisin, a little bit of a blackberry note in there mixing in with the raisins actually. So that's really interesting. This beer is actually very oily and almost slightly sharp in terms of its fruity characteristics. So yeah, the way that this beer goes about its business, I think, is quite interesting. But in terms of its aroma, this is just absolutely beautiful. I could sit and smell this all day, but you know, I've said that many a time when it comes to a Brazilian Imperial coffee stout. As I always say though, take a bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck in. But I think we should have a taste of this one because this will be pretty awesome. So yeah, this one is the Coffee Monster, an 11% Imperial coffee stout from Cervejaria Augustinus in Sao Paulo, a gypsy brewery, of course, down in Brazil. Let's get stuck into this one and see what we have. Slanja, skål, cheers, or as they say in Portuguese, felicidades. Oh man. Once again, Brazil does not disappoint when it comes to the Imperial Stouts. That's ridiculous. That is very, very good. Very good beer. Yeah. Yeah. It's difficult to know where to start with this one, but that is pretty damn awesome. Alan was kind of spot on with his recommendation for this. And it's really interesting too. It's beautiful and silky in its mouthfeel. It has the roasty toasty backbone of a Russian Imperial Stout, and at the same time it shows you that beautiful aromatic and fruity quality that you can get from a Brazilian coffee. This beer gives you everything that you could and kind of should want from the Brazilian Imperial Stouts. Beautiful, very, very nicely done. Yeah, this will be a nice sipper while I write some more code, of course. But yeah, where do we start with this then? Middle third of your palate. Backbone of the beer. It's interesting because you do have this mix. It's almost it is very kind of what I was expecting in a sense from my previous experiences with Brazilian beers, combined with what I picked up from the aroma. This is a beer that kind of follows its aroma quite well. But yeah, middle third of the palate, then you can feel that nice, smooth, slightly dry, woody backbone. On top of that, there's a good little bit of a roasty, toasty. Well-fired bitterness on top of that. But in fairness, the kind of dryness and the roasty toasty qualities that you get out of the beer, the roasty toastiness is of course letting you know, yeah, this is an Imperial Stout. So that would be a bit of special beer, a bit of black malt or something like that. But all the other things that are in this beer on top of that really cover it, to be honest with you. So it's kind of interesting from that perspective. So, yeah, the on top of the roasty toasty well fired bread crust, yeah, you get a little bit of like a sweet rye bready type quality in there. But then on top of that, you've got this very thick and almost oily chocolatey layer. I'm pretty sure just going from the mouthfeel of this beer, this is probably double mash. It reminds me of the double mash beers that I've had from the likes of Amar Brewhus here in Scandinavia, well over in Copenhagen. And as I've said before, when it comes to the Nordic Imperial Stouts, they were very difficult to beat in terms of mouthfeel, but the Brazilians certainly are competing with them. They are definitely competing with them. But yeah, on top of that kind of brown rye bready layer, you've got that sort of you do have that well-fired kind of chocolatey sort of note. It's almost like a roasty toasty chocolate. So at the back of that middle third of your palate, you're getting like a really, 80-90% cocoa chocolate. But as you move further forward, it kind of mellows out a little bit and you get maybe a 60% cocoa chocolate, maybe 50% cocoa chocolate as you reach the front of that middle third of your palate. So yeah, within that, there is almost a little bit of vanilla quality at the front of that middle third of your palate too. The beer certainly does have a wee bit of a vanilla quality for me. On top of that kind of like oily chocolate layer, though it is almost like a kind of sludgy oily chocolate layer, like kind of like a soft Kladkaka Swedish chocolate cake, just really thick and oily, almost solid but not quite. But then you have this kind of, that chocolatey layer almost makes like a bowl in the middle of your palate, and you've got that little oily circle in there, which is all the brown sugars. In the dead centre of your palate, you've got that treacly molasses type note, and that of course is covering the alcohol. It's an 11% beer, that's covering the alcohol. As you move out from that treacly molasses note, the brown sugars gradually mellow out and give you a sweeter caramel. Then you've almost just got a little bit of a more kind of biscuity note to it as well. So yeah, the way that goes together is really quite nice. The brown sugary notes and the way that the oily chocolate complement each other is very interesting. I'd also say that the further you go into the aftertaste with this beer, you start to get a little bit of nuttiness out of it too, which I think is nice. But again, we haven't mentioned the coffee beans yet. We'll come to that now. So the back of that middle third of your palate, the kind of border region between middle third and back third of your palate, you can feel there's a nice bit of bready build up in there. And again, for me, that's pretty awesome. So yeah, nice little bit of bready build up in there. But within that, that's when you get the kind of coffee beans. So we'll take the back third of the palate as well and build the coffee beans into that. So the woodiness gets a little bit drier, of course. You've got the roasty, well-fired black malty qualities of the beer. They become even drier as well. Then above that, you've got that thick, tall, brown bready sort of thing. So yeah, you've got that tall brown bready kind of quality. Um, yeah. And then, the brown bread is kind of rye-like, but it's a bit more grainy, as we say. Then on top of that, you can feel that the coffee beans just kind of creep over the top of that. Um, and it's quite, you can feel that on that kind of coffee bean layer and within that border region, you get this really aromatic quality. But the further you go into the aftertaste, it does become slightly more earthy. So yeah, big aromatic notes there, and it almost gives the beer. It's almost kind of like a minty freshness in a way, but coffee bean. So you're getting that kind of sort of. It's almost like very slightly menthol. It's that same sensation that menthol in the mouth would give you. It's really like that. The aromaticity that you get from the coffee bean in this beer, does a lot like that. So there's a smooth, roasty earthiness, to this one, but you've also got a nice little bit of aromaticity as well. But then on top of that, you can feel with the coffee, it is very much like a kind of plummy and raisiny note. There's a lot of red fruity notes from that particular coffee bean in here too. So yeah, the coffee bean creeps over on top of that kind of big brown bready layer that you've got actually. Then above all of that, there are a few yeasty elements in there. It's like a kind of airy, kind of honeycomby brown bread note sitting on top of the coffee. So yeah, the yeasty notes in this beer take a bit of a back seat to the actual malt base, and the adjunct, the coffee in this beer is very powerful, but it wouldn't be called Coffee Monster otherwise. But it certainly works. It's a beautiful beer, this one, in terms of how the adjuncts and the malt base and things go together. My Portuguese obviously is very roughly this one, but it does say it contains maltodextrina, which I'm guessing is maltodextrose, and I think that explains why this beer is really so thick and oily and creamy in its mouthfeel actually. But not complaining about that. It's a beautifully done Imperial coffee stout, this one, so it gets a big thumbs up from me. I think we've said everything we need to about the back third and the middle third of the palate. The only other thing I would add is that you can of course feel that the back third of the palate is taller. As you come further forward, it just kind of squishes down that little bit. Let's focus on the hoppy side of the beer and the fruity side of things to finish off. So, yeah, in terms of the hoppy side of the beer, then, again, this is an Imperial Stout. I'm not sure how old it is. It feels like some of the hoppy characters dropped out, but it still gives you a good little bit of green component. In the back corners of the palate, you've got a little bit of earthiness there. As you move further forward, you get a little bit of a herbal quality, and as you push toward the kind of front corners of the palate, there's a wee touch of a kind of floral aromatic sort of thing there too, and that kind of adds to the whole aromaticity. It actually blends very well with the aromaticity that you get from the coffee bean in the beer, but round the front curve of the palate, definitely a bit lighter and more grassy, and yeah, I do like how that goes together. It's kind of more oily and grassy around the kind of front third of your palate. So, yeah, that is, I have to say, yeah, that is pretty awesome in that sense. So yeah, lovely big, oily, fruity notes in there as well from this beer, and that kind of mixes in the oily green component that you get in this is good. But yeah, like I say, a little bit of floral aromaticity on the front corners of the palate, then front kind of curve of the tongue. It's definitely more oily and grassy, but still quite zesty. But let's focus on that front third of your palate and the fruity side of the beer. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, again, you get a little bit of that build up there. It is more kind of like chocolate muffin, chocolate brownie like, and the base, you've got a bit of the dry wood underneath, but again, that kind of chocolate brownie type thing, and there's a wee bit of that kind of bitterness. You can get a little bit of the black malt in there too, but then above that, you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So let's focus on those for the moment. So when you take this beer in, absolutely, there's a little bit of that raisiny sharpness there, but this is above the back of that. This is above the back of that. The back half of the front third of your palate there. So let's work forward from there. So little bit of raisiny sharpness, lovely little bit of kind of juicy plum underneath, and as you move further forward, a little bit of a more oily figgy quality to it as well. And as you reach the kind of front half, as you reach the kind of middle point of that front third of your palate, actually, there's a little bit, pardon me, you're starting to feel the transition to like black currant. So yeah, raisins on top, oily plums, fig underneath on the back half, and then as you move toward the kind of front half of the front third of your palate, you get a more black curranty note, and then there's these oily blackberries sitting on top of that beyond there. Yeah, fruity side of this beer is beautiful, lovely, lovely oily kind of notes to it, and it complements the coffee bean that's in there as well. Yeah, I think that's everything we need to say about the flavour profile of this beer, so we can round off with the mouthfeel. So, mouthfeel wise, no question that this beer is full bodied. It's kind of in the mid-range of full bodied, but pushing towards the top end. This beer is very, very thick. The carbonation is very, very smooth. It's silky, but very oily at the same time. So you've got a mix of that silky, oily mouthfeel in there. IBU-wise, it's a bit difficult to pick out. I wouldn't... This one has to be about 80, 90 IBUs. It's pushing toward the top end of the scale. Some of that's coming from the coffee. Some of that's coming from the hoppy side of things too. There's a bit of hoppy earthiness in there. The malt base is giving you a bit of roastiness and dryness, but also the coffee as well. All of that's going together. So yeah, I think that's really nice how that goes together. But big bready notes in there as well. So the malt base has a mix of kind of roastiness, smoothness, and a good little bit of an oily kind of sweetness. And you've also got that big juicy and oily fruitiness from the hops as well. And the you know, this is one of these beers where everything just fits together and it works very, very well. So this is a beautiful, beautiful beer, and I need to say thank you to Alan as well for his recommendation. He told me to get this one from Beer Dome in the Netherlands, and he certainly didn't point me in a bad direction, I have to say that. But I think we can leave it at that for this review. So yeah, this one was the Coffee Monster, an 11% Russian Imperial Stout from Cervejaria Augustinus, a gypsy brewery based in Sao Paulo down in Brazil. Awesome, awesome beer. Certainly in keeping with the standards of Imperial Stout that I've had from Brazil before. And yeah, Imperial Coffee Stout, one of my favourite sub-styles. So yeah, I think we can leave it there. Once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this one in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Cervejaria Augustinus. We will return to these guys at some point in the near future. But yeah, I had a second beer from these guys and it was pretty awesome. Check out my social media, check out theirs. I'm going to sip on the rest of this. And at this point, I think, yeah, going to code a little bit with a wee bit of a buzz, both from the coffee bean, I guess, and from the alcohol in this beer. You can feel it with this one for sure. But yeah, thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, check out theirs, and I'll see you again soon. Embrace the coffee monster. Slange it, skål, cheers, and felicidades. Try some Brazilian beers.